The sound of a refrigerator humming was louder than any shell fire Elias had ever endured. It was the sound of indifference, the banal, relentless insistence of peace, and it grated against the raw nerves war had left exposed beneath his skin. He was back in his small, subsidized apartment, months after demobilization, but the war lived inside his ears. He wasn't haunted by visions. He was haunted by acoustics. Silence was the worst, because silence was where the true sound of that Eastern Front filtered in. The wet slap of mud against boot leather just before the ambush, the choked rattle of a dying man drawing his last breath, the high, thin whine of a mosquito that had landed on his helmet during a 10-hour watch. He'd learned to block out explosions, but he could not block out the small, insidious noises of existence. To cope, he took a job nobody else wanted, clearing and cataloging debris from partially destroyed structures in the contested French border region, places deemed too minor for official recovery teams. It was meticulous, dusty work, perfect for isolation. Today, it was an old stone farmhouse, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. The air in the cellar smelled like ancient wine and damp, forgotten sorrow. He worked slowly, scraping away plaster dust that coated everything in a fine, choking gray. He moved a broken wardrobe, a heavy, oak relic of a domestic life shattered mid-sentence, and noticed a faint, unnatural gap in the stone wall behind it. It wasn't the work of shelling. It was deliberate, a crawl space sealed hastily, perhaps years before the war even touched this land, or perhaps right before the owners fled, hoping they could return for whatever treasure they had secreted away. Elias took his crowbar and peeled back the loose stones, revealing a hollow cavity barely large enough to fit a man's torso, pitch black and cold. Reaching into the darkness of the sealed cavity felt less like recovery and more like disturbing a grave. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the musty odor of ancient velvet and enclosed wood. His gloved hand brushed against something small, smooth, and surprisingly heavy. He pulled it out. A small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than his palm, dark cherry wood inlaid with faded brass filigree depicting tiny, intertwined vines. It was heavy with dust, but otherwise perfectly preserved, protected by the sealed stone tomb. Elias placed it carefully on an overturned barrel, wiping the grit away with a practiced hand. He noted the craftsmanship, too delicate for a soldier's keepsake, too ornate for mere storage. This was a treasure, a relic of quiet peacetime luxury. He ran his thumb over the small, tarnished brass crank on the side. For months, all he had heard were the sounds of cessation. Things breaking, things stopping, things falling silent. But this object promised a start, a continuation. He hesitated, a deep, irrational fear gripping him. What if the sound it produced was terrible? What if it was a harsh, tinny jangle that only amplified the chaos in his head? He'd learned that beauty often held the sharpest edges of pain. The silence of the cellar pressed down on him, amplifying the frantic hammering of his own heart. He knew intimately the precise moment a fuse lit, the exact delay between the click of the pin and the detonation. He knew the sounds that meant imminent suffering, but this little brass crank offered an unknown outcome. With a deep breath that tasted of plaster dust, Elias slowly rotated the crank, feeling the resistance of the tiny, complex mechanism within. He drew it taut and then released his grip. There was a faint click, followed by the hesitant, almost shy beginning of a melody. The tune was not triumphant, not melancholy, and certainly not the martial rhythm Elias expected. It was a simple 8-note rotation, played on tiny, perfectly tuned metal tines. A gentle, lilting waltz, slow and incredibly clear, sounding like water drops falling into a crystal bowl. It was utterly innocent. Elias froze, leaning against the cold stone wall, the sound washing over him, dissolving the noise of the interior war he carried. For the first time since the mortar hit the command post 3 years prior, the internal static quieted. He closed his eyes, and the music box kept turning, its small brass workings whirring softly underneath the delicate melody. It wasn't a sound that asked anything of him. It didn't demand attention. nor did it carry the implied threat of violence. It simply existed, weaving a fragile, predictable pattern. The melody brought forward a specific memory, one he hadn't accessed in years. The faint, distant sound of his mother humming while kneading bread in their old kitchen, years before the enlistment posters went up. It wasn't the same tune, but the quality of the sound, the atmosphere of contained domestic calm, was identical. War had forced him to categorize all sounds into two buckets: immediate threat or ignored background noise. This music box created a third category: pure, unthreatening presence. But as the tune repeated its loop, a chilling realization struck him. This beautiful, perfect little melody was likely the last sound of peace the original owners of this house heard before everything was lost. It was a preserved ghost. This music box provides a momentary, beautiful distraction from the inescapable reality of trauma. It makes us wonder about the nature of healing itself. Does true peace come from forgetting the horrors we have faced? Or does it come from creating new, powerful, beautiful memories that simply overlay the old ones? What is the role of something innocent, like a song, in reframing an existence dominated by violence? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Can beauty truly overwrite the deepest psychological scars? Elias played the box 3 more times until the spring mechanism finally ran out. He didn't immediately rewind it. He just held the small, warm wooden block in his hands, feeling the silent machinery within. The brief reprieve was intoxicating, but it only sharpened the edges of the tragedy that must have surrounded its hiding. He turned the box over, his fingers tracing the fine brass grooves. Near the hinge, almost hidden by decades of dust accumulation, he found a minuscule inscription, a single letter L beneath the date 1937. It was a date that spoke of a quiet European summer, a time before shadows lengthened across the continent. He imagined a little girl, perhaps named Lucy, winding this box up every night before bed, listening to the tiny, repetitive notes, dreaming of ordinary futures. That L became the anchor of the object's immense power. It was no longer just an antique. It was the preserved essence of a life that never got to be fully lived, a future that never arrived. He realized the music wasn't just displacing the sounds of the battle he survived. It was displacing the sound of the silence that followed the battle, the terrible emptiness where normal life used to reside. He carefully gathered the box, wrapping it tightly in a piece of clean cloth salvaged from his pack, deciding immediately that this object would not be cataloged for state recovery. It was his. That night, back in his humming apartment, Elias placed the music box on his nightstand. He waited until the city sounds died down, the distant wail of a siren, the clatter of a late-night tram, and then, in the absolute, oppressive silence that usually signaled the onset of his sleepless dread, he wound the mechanism. The gentle waltz filled the room, fragile yet firm. For the first time, Elias did not reach for the sleeping pills. He listened instead to Lucy's song. The discovery of the music box did not erase the war. Elias still remembered the names of the men he lost, the smell of cordite, the weight of the grief. But the music box gave him a new ritual, a countermelody to the internal orchestra of anxiety. Every evening, he would sit, sometimes just staring at the wall, sometimes simply sipping cold water, and he would play the small waltz. It was a controlled sound, predictable and delicate, proving that noise could be something other than a harbinger of doom. He started to recognize the subtle nuances of the tiny metal tines, the slight catch in the mechanism right before the 8 notes repeated. This small degree of control over his immediate environment became his scaffold for rebuilding. He stopped flinching when a plate dropped. He found he could tolerate the sound of the neighbor's radio, because he knew that later, Lucy's waltz would offer sanctuary. He didn't forget the war, but the music box taught him how to quiet the field hospital that operated perpetually inside his skull. He realized that the greatest silence wasn't the absence of sound, but the absence of peace. And this small, forgotten song, preserved in darkness, was the unexpected key to finding that peace. He eventually left the demolition job, finding work that allowed him to be around people, carrying the music box wrapped securely in his jacket pocket. ready to pull it out if the world grew too loud or too quiet. It was the soldier who survived the battlefield, only to be saved by the forgotten lullaby of a child. If this deeply atmospheric story of quiet resilience and unexpected healing touched your heart, and if you find solace in these introspective moments of history, please subscribe to Quiet Soldier Stories. We are dedicated to sharing the narratives of those who survived the war, not just the battles they fought.